Hi, I'm Sarah Mathey-Holland, and this is Man vs. Land, a segment intended to educate the public on home and landowner topics as discussed with guests in those fields. Today's guest is Mark Lamper, and he is a New Hampshire real estate attorney, and he is also the state manager for Priority Title Services. Welcome, Mark.
Thanks for having me back.
So, Mark, today we're going to talk about covenants, restrictions, and homeowners associations, which I'm sure you know a little bit about.
A little bit.
All right, so why don't we dive in? What is a restrictive covenant, and what is its purpose?
A covenant in general is either a promise to do something or not to do something with your property. Now, you might not have made this promise, a previous owner may have. Because a covenant is created several different ways. Let's give one example. Let's say I have a large tract of land and I decide that I want to split it up into smaller lots. I get town approval to do that, and then I sell those lots. But I don't want other people to be able to further subdivide those lots. I might not want them to have any other animals there except for cats and dogs, just domestic animals. So I have a plan that I want this land to look like and be used into perpetuity. So in the original grant, I create these restrictive covenants. So every time I sell one of these lots, I place these covenants in the deed. They are binding upon successive owners as well. So it could be 100 years ago that someone created this restriction, and you'll see this here in New Hampshire with the rural nature. It will say only domestic animals. So if you're fond of ducks and sheep and horses and cows, and you want to have them, at your home, you might be prohibited from doing so. They can actually get very specific, and as far as the height of the house, some places even have the color of the house if it's a historic district. The other place you'll see it is mostly is in condominiums. Condominiums are created by statute, and each one of them has a declaration of covenants. So there are these rules that are set up at the beginning that every single owner takes the property subject to. And they can be a lot more invasive than some of the general ones for land or buildings and land. They can quite literally talk about how much you have to pay, who has the authority to collect fees, and very specific things that you can and can't do with your property rather than kind of more general broad stroke that you'll see in general real estate ownership.
Now, on a basic level, where would someone find out if they are subject to covenants and restrictions? That
will show up in the Registry of Deeds. And there's something called a constructive notice. So there are millions and millions of documents recorded in every registry. You know about them, everyone watching this, you know about them whether you do or not. Because there's a common law theory called constructive notice. So if it's part of the public record and you have the ability to go research it, you're deemed to know it whether you do or not. So there's two instruments that you basically find it in. You should find it in any deed. If someone says, I'm going to sell you this property, you're like, oh, I'm going to look at the title, and you would look at that owner's deed. And it should list those restrictions in there. Sometimes they don't. Either they, by bad drafting, they forget to put them in the deed, or for some other reason they've chose not to. Those restrictions are still there. If they're not in the deed, they're still there. So the best way is to do a title search, and we will actually examine the title, not just for the current owner, but for previous owners, to find out what restrictions have been there historically in the chain of title.
Now, what sort of problems arise from restrictive covenants? What are some examples that you've come across in the past?
Well, some of them just don't apply anymore. Okay. And they can be because of the nature of the property has changed. It might have restrictive about the color of the house. It can be the size of the house. And back then, when originally, whether it be 50 years ago, 5 years ago, 100 years ago when it was created, they just don't apply anymore. And so whatever the reason the restrictive covenant may be, the issue is who has the authority to release that. And that's really the rub. If I create something, a restrictive covenant, and I break up the land in my earlier example, and I sell you property. You sell it 5 times, and then some new owner has some restrictive covenant that they wish to, it doesn't apply anymore. And so they would like to have it released from the property. Well, who has the authority to release? There's really the rub. It was a right held by me, then my heirs or assigns might hold that right. But it could have been so long ago, no one cared about it since then. So you would likely have to do like some kind of genealogy search to find out who my heirs and assigns, who have no idea they actually hold this right anymore. Right. The other issue is who enforces these? For the same token that you don't know who can release it.
Right.
Let's say your neighbor does move in and they decide that they like ducks. And those ducks may smell, they may be loud, they may attract foxes and fisher cats and animals that you don't want in the area. How do you enforce that? Because it's the individual who holds who created that grant, who holds the right to enforce it. If you don't know who can enforce it, by the same token, who don't know who can release it, who can enforce it? So it's unless that authority stays around, like maybe with a condo association or a homeowners association, a lot of times it just winds up as something on paper that's hard to enforce.
Yeah, and that's very common around here. Larger tracts of land were cut down to smaller parcels.
Exactly.
And I live in a small development that's very similar to that, and we have restrictive covenants against farm animals or home businesses, and we have goats on our road, and we have home businesses. So it all goes back to who can enforce it.
Exactly.
Now let's talk a little bit about homeowners associations, which you generally find in condos up here.
Right.
What type of restrictions and covenants, and how can those be changed? Because those are probably easier to be changed than the ones that are single family homes.
So both, and some homeowners associations and condo associations can actually be different. It depends the vehicle that creates them. A lot of homeowners associations might relate to perhaps your development. Let's say you have a private road, and so whomever created that those few tracks and sold them off said, well, we have a way that someone needs to decide who's going to repave this road, who's going to plow this road. So they might have created a homeowners association, which is quite literally, just to say there's 4 of you, the 4 of you are members of the homeowners association. So that body that's created is actually, you've designated who has the authority to make these changes, who has the authority to collect funds. Same with a condo association. By the declaration that creates the condo association and creates the covenants, it creates a living body of individuals made up of voting members of who owns the condominium. So there you don't have to wonder who has the authority. It's created right in the initial documents that create the association, whether it be condo or homeowners. So that's easy, insofar as you know who it is. The hard part is a consensus of these people agreeing on what to do to change. That's the hard part. People getting along.
That's always the hard part.
Yes, it is.
So with regards to joining a homeowners association, there are a couple of ways that you can enter into it. One is, voluntarily, as far as creating a homeowners association with the folks that live near you.
Right.
Our other ways are by purchase, if you purchase into one.
Exactly. If you purchase into one, you're, by accepting delivery of that deed and by effectuating that purchase, you have joined whether you want to or not. It becomes an involuntary act just by accepting the deed, because the deed will say, subject to rules and regulations of the homeowners association. Well, guess what? You just joined. You joined the association. Right. You can create it yourself with, let's say, you and your neighbors decide that you're sick of deciding who's going to plow, or you've been out there plowing. So you can create your own association, record something in the registry, all bind yourself to work together. Typically, unless there's a new development, homeowners associations aren't necessarily being created much anymore, but they exist out there, and it's a club that you join whether you like it or not when you purchase that property.
Now, talk about some other things that a homeowner may not know, some other little tidbits that we haven't already discussed.
Well, one thing, whether it be homeowners association or condo association, is when you purchase this property, a lot of people don't put a lot of thought into the health of the association. Okay. So let's say you move into a building that's a condominium, there are 8 units. The condo association collects condo fees every single month. However, any purchaser in property that is subject to a homeowners or condo association should look at the books to find out what the financial viability of that is. Because if there's been mismanagement or they've not been collecting enough fees, say you have a $10,000 roof repair, but there's only $500 in the association bank account. Sure. Well, guess now who's going to split $9,500 amongst the other parties? What if they don't agree to do so? Maybe the association doesn't talk about being able to do assessments to create more fees. So and New Hampshire has had, a little before our time practicing, but historically I know in the 80s and 90s, several condo associations went bankrupt. So the people who lived there were on their own to pay for plowing, to pay for maintenance, to pay for water and sewer, to pay for insurance, items that should have been paid for as part of the condo fees that they paid every single month. So the financial viability of any association you join, you can never take for granted because you're just joining this club for the first time. You don't know how it's been managed up to this point.
Right. And is that information available for any potential purchaser to look at?
Yeah. Now that's where someone in your position comes in. As the real estate agent either for the buyer, in this case you would see in your purchase and sale, and most purchase and sales actually have a box you can tick. If not, you should fill it out yourself, saying this purchase is subject to review of the association books. And so therefore, if the association produces financial statements that aren't satisfactory to the buyer or refuse to share them, which sometimes, like we said, people don't get along, right, then the buyer can then decide, they have a contingency now in their purchase and sale agreement because you've done good drafting, you've done good advising of them, and then they get out. And that's where the part where you can't have a good enough real estate agent in that situation. Because as a buyer, I don't know how to ask for that. Right. You're the expert. And so if you put that in, you've saved them immeasurably. But you should never, in my opinion, purchase into any kind of association without knowing the financial viability, or you might be writing a big check.
Absolutely. Oh, you talked a little bit about how to enter into a homeowners association. Can homeowners associations or condo associations be dissolved?
They can be if it's put into the declaration of covenants on how to dissolve them. So it all depends, because it's a voluntary contract that everyone's agreed upon. So can they dissolve? How do they dissolve? Should be in the agreement themselves. If it's not put into the agreement and people don't want to play together anymore, then they're going to wind up in court to decide how to dissolve it. Because there's no automatic dissolution mechanism by statute. It can be dissolved by court or in some cases, but typically it's a voluntary agreement, and so the parties have decided themselves how they're going to get in and then how they get out.
Now that's an interesting point, that item should be within the covenants or restrictions. What other things should a party be looking for within the covenants?
One of the most important, it's about finances for the most part. One, they want to make sure that the finances are adequate to meet the needs. They should also inquire of the condo association in particular is what future capital expenditures do they plan. There's actually one development in Lincoln where a purchaser did not buy because he was aware that there would be special assessments on $10,000 per unit holder because they were putting a new roof. This is a very large building. This was all shared to me. I had no intimate knowledge about it. And so as a result, we said, I'm not going to purchase because I can afford to buy this. I can't afford within 6 months of my purchase to pay another $10,000. So the finances of as it exists on the books, any future expenses that they're going to do, and then you want to be able to see how they assess. Does the condo association have very broad liberal powers in order to do any special assessments? Right. Should they want to build another building, can you find yourself 1/12 responsible for the share of that? Because it's simply by majority vote in most cases. If you've got 12 units, 7 say, let's do it. As that 1/12, you've been outvoted, and so you're still financially responsible because you've accepted the property, which is subject to these rules.
Right. And whether it's a small association, like a single family, small development, where you have to discuss and vote on plowing right. for every season and who's going to pay for that, right. Or in a larger development, whether you're responsible for certain things as a homeowner. I know with condominiums, most often you're responsible as an owner from the studs in, and then the homeowners association and your dues that you pay actually take care of the exterior of the property, right. With a few exceptions, and that would be any special assessments to cover anything that may not be accounted for in the reserves, such as a roof. or new paving, siding, painting, whatever.
Right.
But as a homeowner, you may be responsible for windows and doors. So you want to be especially aware of what your responsibility is within that ownership. So.
And I'll say historically, very, very few purchasers actually inquire as to this.
Right.
And no matter how many times you tell them, they still don't. But these are all great tips to people. The advice you give is only as good as the person listening to it, whether they take it or not.
Right.
But the financial aspect to any association, I've seen people leave and sell because it became financially unviable.
Right.
Or literally the people who were there couldn't get along well enough that it affected their use and enjoyment of the property.
Right.
So
And
they
if
moved on.
the association is not in good financial standing, it makes it difficult for those who want to exit to do so.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Because the next person who comes in may do that due diligence
Right.
and say, I'm not going to enter. I've had clients that I've represented who I've had to inquire. There were existing owners into a condo association, and the association treasurer was very reticent to actually share the books. Ultimately did because they had no choice but to do so.
Right.
And there was no malfeasance, no theft of funds, but there was a little bit of mismanagement, likely, and wholly inadequate amount of association fees charged every single month. So every year there was a special assessment that was a real bite to everyone because they couldn't budget. So I think they changed that, but it also made it very, very hard for this client to sell. And it was on the market at a below market price for 18 months, when the normal turnaround should have been about 3 months for such a unit.
Wow.
For in other associations, but the association,
Yep.
held back the sale.
Yeah, that's difficult. And when you talk about management of an association, they can be self-managed,
Right.
or they could hire out the management role.
Exactly.
And there are benefits and drawbacks to both of them.
And when you think about the association, say you have that 12-unit condominium, generally those 12 members, those 12 owners are they are the association, and so they vote by majority. They may then in turn elect a board because those 12 people may not be around, may not want to deal with the day-to-day management, or like you said, they may take those condo fees that you pay every single month and hire someone else to do all this. And if you have a seasonal nature, like where a lot of the real estate that we deal in, you have absentee owners who aren't around, and so therefore they might not be available. And so they get quite grumpy when they're not available because that's not where their life is, and then they find that decisions have been made. It was their duty to participate,
Right.
but nonetheless, the seasonal nature of part-time owners are definitely make it more complicated to efficiently run any of these associations.
Now, when we first started, you had talked about some restrictions or covenants or restrictive covenants that no longer apply, whether it be just because of the time period or by law. Can you share some of the ones that you found most interesting?
I think the size of the home is I've run into a few times, and that way, and I can't recall whether they wanted them to be of a certain grander size or smaller size. And so it just didn't apply anymore. And the courts don't love these either. If you dictate how big a house has to be, what that does is the point of that is the bigger a house, generally the more expensive a house. The more expensive a house, the predisposition would be to keep out certain elements who don't have the same financial resources. So you're looking for a certain type of individual to move in.
Right.
So the restrictive covenants can wind up being a way of some kind of discrimination in order to keep individuals out. So that's what I've seen. The only times that it's ever prevented a closing is that we had some covenant that just was, and I can't give you the specific example, I wish I could, but was enough that the person chose, well, I don't want to be here. This would have to go. And would there be any enforcement of it? No. But they thought long term, well, what if someone does rear their head up and say, yes, I do want to enforce this covenant because I have the authority to do so? What if a subsequent purchaser that they want to sell to says, okay, this chills the sale for me? So in this case, it did chill the sale, because would have ever come up? Probably not.
Right.
But just the fact that it could was enough to say, I'm all set, there's lots of real estate out there, I'll buy something else.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that, and I see that all the time, and even, in my own experience with my own personal home, it's very interesting to go back and read the deed and find out what those restrictive covenants are, and that the only person that really can enforce them is the original party or someone else that they've assigned.
Right.
So it's neat, really. So to recap, so restrictive covenants can kind of show up in your deed and in many different forms. That it is your responsibility as a homeowner or as a buyer, purchaser, to review those and make sure that you are aware of what they are.
Absolutely.
If it's something that you want to change or amend,
Good luck.
generally good luck. Yeah. And yeah, just know kind of what you're getting into and know what the possibility is.
Yeah, don't take for granted that it has been disclosed to you. You really need to do some digging if any association may be there of any form.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely important to note that if the information is available to you, then you are responsible to know what it is,
Right,
whether
absolutely.
you know it or not. So, Mark, this is the second time that you've joined us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I
being
appreciate
here.
it.
And we will definitely get you back to chat a little bit more about some other wonderful topics that folks may or may not know about and what their responsibilities are. So, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.